Next up, we have Lindsay McClary. Lindsay, if you want to, yep, there you are. And feel free to share your screen. So we'll get started with Lindsay's. Lindsay is a restoration ecologist for the Confederated Tribes of Grande Ronde. As part of the Tribal Natural Resources Department, her role is to protect, restore, and enhance fish and wildlife habitats on tribal lands in balance with tribal priorities and cultural ways of life. Lindsay has worked for the tribe for 10 years, and we're happy to have her today to talk about the Tribal Native Plant Materials Program. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Alexis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. If other folks can't, let us know. We know Tom had some issues earlier, so just trying to keep monitoring that. You can make a comment about that in the chat, and I'll let you know, Lindsay.
Perfect. Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to the Institute of Applied Ecology for hosting this conference and creating the opportunity to talk about our Tribal Native Plant Materials Program. So like Alexis mentioned, my name is Lindsay McClary, and I am the Habitat Restoration Ecologist for the Confederated Tribes of Grande Ronde. For those not familiar with us, we are located in Western Oregon, basically halfway between the capital city of Salem and the Pacific Coast. I've worked for the tribe since 2010, but I've only been in this position for the past 4 years. And my work focuses largely on habitat restoration and is connected to the Tribal Native Plant Materials Program through programmatic support and utilization of plant materials. The real star of the program is Nursery Supervisor and Manager Jeremy Oiwa. Jay's been with the tribe for over 15 years and has a background in silviculture and fire, including wildland suppression and prescribed burning. He was instrumental in the program's inception and has been key in the program's success, but he could not join today, so I only hope to do his program justice. So since time immemorial, the Confederated Tribes of Grande Ronde have been the historical land manager of the Willamette Valley. The native plants and animals are intrinsic resources to the tribe as they form the foundation to historic traditions and values. Although the tribes were removed from their ancestral homelands, people never lost connections to place. Today, traditional ecological knowledge, self-sufficiency, and landscape connection help to develop a native plant nursery to fulfill a plant materials need. Traditionally, tribes lived in permanent villages supported by seasonal rounds and regional gathering, moving through regional areas during different times of the year based on resource abundance and resource management needs. Plants were regularly gathered and cultivated for food, basketry, tools, and medicines. The tribe actively managed plant resources, and camas is a great example of that. Large patches of camas once filled the Willamette Valley, and that is a bulbous root that can be cooked in an earthen oven and eaten right away, or ground down for camas cakes for storage and trade at a later time. This plant does well with regular disturbance as the bulbs stay closer to the soil surface, which makes it easier for harvesting, while undisturbed camas patches have bulbs much deeper and more difficult to reach. Tribal families had individual camas patches that were recognized as well as regularly managed. So historically, the Willamette Valley was largely comprised of prairie and oak savanna and oak woodland habitats. This was due to the influence of natural flooding cycles and natural fire. Some fires occurred naturally through lightning strikes, but more regular fires occurred through burns conducted by the Kalapuya peoples. Prescribed burning helped to preclude vegetation succession and maintain open prairie conditions. This increased hunting opportunities and also helped to cultivate plants for basketry materials. The new shoots produced following a fire disturbance were often softer and straighter, making them ideal for weaving. These historical conditions fostered a valley with high capacity for native plant materials. Prior to development, the tribe had high accessibility to areas for cultivation and gathering. Hazel patches were regularly maintained and gathered from to make baskets using fire. Today, this is what the Willamette Valley looks like and we're used to seeing. It has a reduced capacity for native plants coupled with reduced level of access for tribal members. Urban development from cities, towns, and roads, along with agricultural development, have fragmented the native landscapes of the valley. Remaining patches are often publicly owned or managed by private interests, resulting in a lack of access. So the tribe desired to improve tribal member access to native plant materials. And in 2014, the tribe partnered with the Institute of Applied Ecology to secure a restoration grant from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board titled Plants for People. This award provided funding over 3 years to support Jay's transition into the nursery manager role. It also provided startup funding to develop the nursery. With this funding, we built raised beds. It included funding for materials, supplies, and seed. We've built 2 large raised beds here at the Natural Resources Department. And the focus for these beds was to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge in the selection and cultivation of culturally significant plants and first foods. The intent of this was to enhance tribal member connection and access, but also to utilize tribally grown cultural plants in restoration efforts through outplanting. In 2015, the tribe secured a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency under the Clean Water Act, Section 319, to support the program further by building a greenhouse. This type of funding is non-competitive and available to all federally recognized tribes. We've helped other tribes pursue this funding for native plant nurseries, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone further about this if there's interest in a nursery startup. The greenhouse for us increased the capacity with additional growing space, and it allowed for the development of containerized plants and bare root starts. Species have included Mattia sativa, which is the tarweed pictured here. This plant does its whole growing season in 1 annual cycle, so it's important. It's not a perennial that grows natural or over years in the field, so it's important for us to have starts for outplanting. Other plants included snowberry and serviceberry, mock orange, blue elderberry, Oregon oak, swamp rose, and salmonberry. In 2017, the tribe partnered with the Institute of Applied Ecology again and secured another Plants for People Phase 2 through OWEB. This funding continued to support nursery efforts through 2019 and expanded the capacity by establishing cutting beds. The plants grown here help support tools, basketry materials, seeds, and cuttings for use in restoration sites. Species include cow parsnip, which is considered Indian celery. It's an edible interior stalk, and it's used for growing seed production at the nursery. Other cutting bed starts have included wild strawberry, red osier dogwood, different types of willows, Douglas spirea, as well as Pacific 9-bark. So the intent of the program was to enhance tribal access to culturally significant plants and enhance sovereignty through self-sufficiency. And although people were a part of the concept through the program's development, the overwhelming response from the community, partners, and interested parties was not anticipated. Jay has given nursery tours to hundreds of visitors and has been in the networking and media spotlight for the meaningful and impactful work he is doing. He has also coordinated several work days where people can participate in the cultivation process. And what you're seeing here is AmeriCorps volunteers helping with the cultivation process, as well as a tribal council member, John George, blessing the camas bulbs coming from the nursery. One of the most notable Plants for People connections has been with the tribal children. The nursery provides on-campus access within the tribal community, making visits during each season a regular occurrence. Children come and learn about the plants, their uses, and traditional practices such as harvesting camas bulbs with digging sticks made of hazel with antler handles. For some, this is the first time they are getting their hands in dirt and learning about traditional ecological knowledge related to native plants. Enhancing sovereignty through self-sufficiency was also an important part of this project because there was a gap in availability in plant materials and restoration needs. So the tribe wanted to be able to provide their own plans for restoration projects that were happening. The tribe reacquired the Chahalpam wildlife area along the North Santiam River in phases during 2013 to 2019, totaling 462 acres. That a portion of it is in the map that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. This area has significant historical connection, once being the home of the Santiam band of the Kalapuya, and once hosted broad floodplain forests. Upon acquisition, about 195 acres were in agricultural production. That's the mapped fields in gray and orange that you see on the map. And the tribe desired to restore these acres back to native habitats. Plant materials from the tribal nursery have helped to support this restoration effort, and to date, 51 acres have been replanted. That's the orange polygons. So additionally, having the greenhouse capacity within the tribal native plant materials program has allowed us to collect seed from Chahalpam, grow the starts in containers, and then replant them during restoration efforts to protect the genetic integrity of site-specific plant stocks. Another site for restoration includes the Champoeg State Park. In cooperation with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, as well as the Institute of Applied Ecology, the Plants for People projects have enhanced the tribe's connection with the Champoeg State Park, which is also a site with significant cultural connection. Historically, this site was important to trade, being located along the Willamette River. It was also important for gathering food and harvesting, specifically yampa, which is an edible root. Prairie habitat restoration actions have included outplanting materials grown in the tribal nursery using volunteers and partnerships, as well as manual weeding to reduce the presence of herbicide, cultural events, and the utilization of prescribed fire as a management tool. Within the project, Champoeg State Park is a site for reestablishing cultural harvest by tribal members. The tribal nursery grows approximately 45 native species. Some of the ones that I haven't mentioned that were included in the startup on this program includes the camas, which is both large and small camas, yampa, the edible root, which is from the carrot family, bare stem biscuit root, which is more of a medicinal plant versus a food plant, narrow leaf onion, crown brodia, and some of these can be difficult to find in commercial nurseries. So having tribal capacity in-house allows restoration sites to utilize these culturally significant plants that are very important to the tribe. To date, the program has supplied over 30,000 plants for projects, including bulbs, roots, corms, cuttings, plugs, and containerized plants. Approximately 60 pounds of seed have been produced, with more to come this next season. And then 2 pounds of cured tobacco leaf has been grown and cured for our Cultural Resources Department. So how can folks get public access to this facility? The nursery is available for public tours as well as small public purchases. We're not set up for a commercial nursery, but Jay has sold to private entities, both partnerships and just citizens of Oregon. Recently, the tribe partnered with Polk Soil and Water Conservation District to secure an NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program to incorporate TEK into landscape planning for local landowners. 2 videos describing this have been released by Polk County and the Lucky Newt Watershed Council. Those are available on YouTube. And then one of the ways to include TEK for those local landowners in the RCPP program is to incorporate tribal native plant material program plants. So additionally, the tribe partnered again with the Institute of Applied Ecology to secure another OWEB grant titled Plants for People Phase 3 that will support the program administration and nursery expansion through 2023. If folks are interested in touring or purchasing plant material, the best way is to contact Jay directly. His information was included in the front of the presentation, which should be available after today. And that has his phone number and email contact. You're welcome to contact me as well, but Jay is the best contact. And this is my final slide. So at this point in time, I will stop and take questions, but I did just want to point out that I don't know if my cursor can be seen, but the 2 YouTube videos on traditional ecological knowledge produced in partnership with Polk SWCD and Lucky Mute Watershed Council are here. So there's one video that talks about the concepts of traditional ecological knowledge, and then there's one with the applications of TEK. I did have those hyperlinks, but they didn't show up very well on the PowerPoint. So you'll have to copy and paste those in there. They feature Jay talking about the nursery program, as well as Greg Archuleta from our Cultural Resources Department talking about the concepts of TEK. So thank you for your time, and I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for this wonderful presentation. Just a reminder, we are now going to have a few minutes for questions, and I will be pulling them from the Q&A box icon that you see at the bottom of your screen. So if you see a question you would like answered, please like it, and the questions with the most likes will be moved to the top so we can make sure to get those answered. So Lindsay, it looks like the first question we have is, do you have a long-term funding strategy for this program? Are you able to share it? Asking as a tribal biologist constantly struggling to fund our programs.
Yeah, totally. I hear you and I feel you, because funding is always one of those things that, you know, especially if it's grant funded, it has a sunset. So, you know, when we started in 2014, we were trying to build it for tribal member access and utilization of plants that we grow in some of our restoration sites. And what we didn't realize is the overwhelming support. People have always been part of the landscape, and in the plant world, we do talk a lot about plants and focus on plants, but the human element of plants sometimes gets overshadowed. And I think it's an important element to highlight here and think about, that people have always been on the landscape. And because of that, we have had some luck in getting you know, the startup costs under the original plants for people, but then also securing phase 2 and phase 3. Those are all 3-year funding cycles. So we've essentially secured funding over a 9-year program. But I did mention the EPA section, Clean Water Act section 319. We use that for some of the startup costs in the greenhouse, but subsequently, and hopefully going forward, we have carved out some of that money for Jay's administrative time. So that is not a ton of money. Like I mentioned before, it's non-competitive, open to all federally recognized tribes. If you don't have that already, we can talk later. I'm sure you might be plugged into that already. But a portion of that is sustaining Jay's wages, hopefully, you know, from here going forward. That said, the tribe is also paying for his position part-time and willing to go full-time if we don't pull in grants. We've just been lucky enough to do that. But hopefully we're moving in a direction where it becomes self-sustaining. So selling plant materials, you know, when I use the plant materials from the nursery, they don't come free to me. So I have to pay with them with either tribal dollars or grant money that we've brought in. So hopefully expanding it to a point where it is self-sustaining. That said, it's gotten to a point where it's a lot of work for just one person. So that's kind of a long answer to not really say we don't have secured funding at this point in time, but we're confident that we can plug the pieces in when we need to.
That's great. Thank you. And then another question we have is there a network of tribal plant materials programs that help each other find resources and share lessons?
Yeah, you know, Jay might be able to answer that question a little bit better. I know that he's been to nationwide conferences. I don't know if there's anything tribally specific. There may be smaller working groups. And, you know, forgive me if I'm not getting that answer correct. He may be plugged into other ones, but I do know that we have helped others by reviewing their plant materials startup outline, a management plan for developing a nursery, as well as plugging into the funding. So I think Jay's certainly plugged into the right people, but I don't know of anything that's like tribally specific, like other, there are like tribal wildlife societies or fishery societies or other practitioner work groups. I'm not aware of anything that's tribally specific for nurseries or plants.
All right, good to know. And then we have a question asking, does the tribe develop plant materials that are perhaps keystone in the local ecology, but not necessarily culturally significant as food, tool, medicine, or basketry?
Yeah, I think it's been mostly focused on first foods and culturally significant plants, but that's not to say that keystone species wouldn't come online later. Something that kind of jumps out to my mind is like Kincaid's lupin. We're not currently growing anything, it's a federally listed plant. We're not growing anything in the nursery right now for that, but we do have sites, restoration and habitat management sites where it is currently growing or that we would like to reintroduce that. So it's something that could come online later, but right now it's really just focused on first foods, but not to say that there is an opportunity later.
Great, thank you. And then could you talk a bit more about how the genetic integrity of the plants is preserved?
Yeah, so, there's been a lot of talk about climate change. I think it's on everyone's forefront of their minds, especially when they're on the landscape or writing management plans. We have been working, as an example, at our Chahalpam wildlife area really since 2014 upon when we reacquired it through the Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program. So the intent there is we're seeing what is growing on the site itself and thinking, this is not scientifically researched on our end, but more observation and anecdotally recorded that we're thinking that whatever is happening on that site, the plants are genetically responding and becoming more resilient over time with the soils that they're growing in and the microclimate that they're existing in. So I think there's been some discussion about the heat wave that happened last year. And what we had noticed is a lot of our plants that we had put out planted in February, by the time the heat wave came in June, we were worried about the stress of the heat. So far, what we've noticed is not as much mortality as we had anticipated. And so we're wondering if some of those, the genetics that have been preserved from the site by taking them back to the nursery, growing them up, and then outplanting there is helping to protect that. The jury's still out on that. We don't really have an answer. We're sort of thinking about that as we're adapting and moving forward. Not all of the plants that go to Chahalpam came from Chahalpam or came from the nursery. We have a great relationship with Bonneville Environmental Foundation that has a contract grow that we've utilized a lot of other local nurseries. But that's just one way we're sort of looking at it. And maybe time will tell, it'll be interesting to kind of see what the plants taken from there and outplanted do in another, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely, it will be. Okay, so have you seen any practical changes with respect to cooperative exchanges of native restoration practices between the tribes and federal agencies?
That's a great question. I would say in my very short experience here, I would say yes, in some situations. So I definitely, especially being in this restoration position in the last 4 years, I think my networking capacity has increased. And so I feel like there's a lot more interest in involving the tribe. There's a lot more conversations. And with that, I personally have felt that there's a lot more meaningful conversations and connections. I think it's no secret that sometimes projects do try to get tribal involvement using cold calling or, kind of trying to check a box. That totally happens and probably will always happen. But I think that in my personal experience, there has been a lot more meaningful, deeper connections. And I think one good example of that is the relationship with Institute of Applied Ecology. I mean, there's really great staff there, and we've built long-term meaningful relationships and connections. That's not a federal agency, but it is a great example of like people working together for a common goal, and really recognizing the ancestral knowledge and ancestral history that goes along with those landscapes. But yeah, I in my work world, I do have a lot of other federal agency partners, and I have felt more momentum and unification on projects.
That's wonderful to hear. We have a few more minutes, so if you're game to keep going with questions, we'll keep going. Okay, great. So could the YouTube video links tribal native plant materials be posted in the chat or here? I glanced briefly at the chat. I think they were posted, but if not, maybe we can make sure that link gets put up somewhere.
Yeah, totally. I think I could do it, or you could do it after, but I don't think I can do it while I'm in presentation mode, but I can, as soon as I hop off, I'm happy to plug those in, or maybe Alexis is on it.
Yeah, I am adding them to our Native American Community Organization board, so they're easy to access there on the Whova app.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so is there a role for tribal community colleges in supporting plant materials programs?
Yes, I think the short answer to that is yes. I think that there's a lot of brainstorming spinoffs that could go in that direction, but something that just comes to my mind for me is, we would be interested if there was like a particular student or project looking at helping us update a management plan or implement the nursery management plan components that maybe aren't being done. Also like a business plan. I know that that's something that's been an interest of ours. And, I think a shell of one does exist, but like basically how to make the nursery self-sustaining, that would be interesting. But like in terms of getting your hands dirty, I think Jay is always hiring 1 to 2 seasonal staff in the main growing season just to help with the cultivation and nursery operations. So those are just a couple. I mean, I think there's plenty others. So I would say contact me or Jay, or we can, set up a call if there's some interest. But, we also have volunteer days. There's lots of opportunities.
Wonderful. And then one more question that I see is, how are seeds physically stored?
Yeah, so right now we have a laboratory that has freezer and cooler space. And so the seeds themselves are dry stored, I think in dried bags, but in the cooler. And then we also, through our partnership with IAE, I think we have some cold storage at the Corvallis Plant Materials Center. So that said, we don't produce a ton of seed right now, but I think we're moving in that direction because I do a lot of like bare root stem planting, but I also do a lot more seed dispersal. And so I think a lot of restoration practitioners use a lot of seed as well. And so I think we're moving in that direction, but yeah, cold storage right now.
Great, thank you. That's all the time we have for questions right now, but I am going to, so that we don't get the questions confused with previous talks, what I'm going to do are for the questions that haven't been answered, I'm going to say that they've been answered. So they'll go into the answered section. And then Lindsay, if you have time and want to answer any of those, you can actually type responses. So okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay. That's great. And thanks for all the questions. It seems like the question and answer box is working pretty well on our end, at least. Hopefully it's working well for all of you to answer questions and then to upvote them as well if you have a similar question. So I see we have Nicole online. Welcome, Nicole. This is our final presentation before we have a nice long lunch break. So thanks for sticking with us. And